Welcome to Momentous. I am Pastor Rebecca Great, the pastor mission developer for Momentous and the host for our weekly podcast. At Momentous, we believe that God is present with us in each and every single one of our moments. We believe that our stories are connected to God's story and to one another's stories. We believe that this connection and relationship changes our lives and our entire world. Before we begin, I invite you to take a deep breath in. Hold it while you count to 3, and then slowly release that breath. Today, we are joined by Pastor Sarah Mayer-Flatt, who serves as a pastor within the ELCA and also as the storyteller for the Southeast Michigan Synod of the ELCA. So, Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself to the Momentous community?
Yeah, it's great to be here. I am a full-time wheelchair user, and I live with my husband kind of on the Michigan-Ohio border. I've served in 3 different congregations and have had some health concerns over the last couple of years that I've really needed to focus my energy on. The role of storyteller came about as an effort to keep me engaged in our synod and in the church, but to give me a different pace of pastorhood and what that looks like. I've also served as the team leader for Dale, which is now known as the Table, for a few different cycles of the youth gathering, and we'll talk more about that in a little while as well.
Pastor Sarah and I met while we were both in seminary at the Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary, which is in Columbia, South Carolina. And we met at a weekly cookout. Our whole community gathered on, depending on the year, some years it was Friday nights, some years it was Saturday nights. And Pastor Sarah started seminary a year ahead of me. So she was already on campus and was friends with everybody and knew everybody's life story. And I was on campus for about 12 hours when I heard about there's a cookout tonight. You should come. And I said, okay. And so it was a potluck style meal. So I had just moved in, hadn't hardly unpacked anything, but I knew like I could get a throwaway pan and make like some brownies, like
The
actual
world's
regular.
best brownies.
And I just kind of innocently showed up and like set them on the table. And then there was a cookout and I started making friends. And about an hour and a half into the cookout, everyone had started to kind of get into the desserts. And all of a sudden, I hear this motorized sound just starting out of nowhere and coming to a almost literally screeching halt on my left side as this stranger at this point shows up and says, I heard you made the brownies. We're going to be best friends. And I am pretty confident I just stared at her and said, okay, who are you?
That's exactly what happened, actually. Uh, the kicker of the story is that I was still right.
Well, yeah. You win. But so it's really fun whenever we get to have conversations with our friends and we all get to like share our expertise and to share our stories with the world. So I am very glad that you made some time to join us in this particular like stage of your life while you are learning what this new rhythm is. So thanks for joining us today. This fall, the Momentous podcast has been focusing on this overall theme called Burning Questions. And this theme was formed as the result of us posting a question on our social media stories, and we asked the community to respond. So the question we posed to the community was, what confuses you about God or the Bible or the church or Christianity? And we left that up for a week or 10 days or something and just waited for folks to share the things that confused them. And all fall long, we've been giving kind of introductory answers to some of those questions because they're really big and they're really heavy. Starting an answer for them and then helping folks find where they can learn more as they continue to work toward an answer for themselves. So today's burning question is, why do some people get better after others pray for them and others don't?
First, I want to clarify something. When when you say others don't, you're implying that others don't get well versus others don't pray for them. Is that correct?
That is my assumption in how I read it. Like, why do some people get better and other people don't, is how I interpret it.
Me too. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. So this is a big question, and it seems to be really wrapped up within this idea of theodicy, which is the simple question, haha, the simple question, why do bad things happen to good people? Answering that question is talking about the difference between forgiveness and healing in this world already. And so the more specific question around why some people get better after people pray for them and others don't get better feels like a very real question that comes from a place of some hurt and some confusion over God's role in our lives. So I think first we need to remember that God isn't a vending machine, and there's no amount of faithful prayer or Bible study or worship or even offerings that we can give that will make God answer our prayers more than it would make God answer other prayers. I, for one, have had a lot of prayers said for me, not only in the last couple of years with my health concerns, but since I was about 4, people have prayed for me. And that's because when I was 4, I was diagnosed with leukemia, and the leukemia was ravaging my body. And so I was given a form of chemotherapy, which we all know is a treatment for cancer. And the chemotherapy put me into remission, which was great news. But within less than 2 weeks, it also paralyzed me from the chin down, which was not great news. The number of people that prayed for me as a small child and for my family and for our world as we were adjusting to what this new normal meant, with not just a kid who had survived cancer, but now a kid who was permanently disabled. The number of prayers for that, in some people's minds, should have moved mountains. But what those prayers really did was uplift us and allow us to be part of a faith community that allowed us to be ourselves and to be real and vulnerable and safe. And all of those things came out of the courage and the fortitude that we had from receiving people's prayers, despite the fact that they weren't being answered in the way people were praying for me. I was not going to ever walk again. I did regain movement of my upper body, which was a miracle in and of itself. But I've had enough health issues since that time in my life that I have again received enough prayers to move mountains. And instead, I just continuously find myself in faith communities that welcome me in for who I am and value me as a member of the community, not in spite of, but because of my disability. And even though I truthfully wish that people's prayers would be answered the way they were prayed, because yes, I want to be physically healed and made well. I know that their prayers have given me a different kind of healing, which is often what Bible stories refer to, even though at first glance, a Bible story appears to be simply about physical healing.
Yeah, that reminds me of the stories in Luke that I think they usually show up in the lectionary together as like one cohesive unit. And one is a story about a woman who had been like bleeding for years and years and years, and she touches the hem of Jesus' cloak, and then she is healed. And then another religious, and then the second story, a religious leader runs up and asks for his daughter to be healed. And both of those stories like mention this interweaving of faith and healing that I wonder if what you just said about how it can be about restoration and not the physical healing. I wonder if those might be good stories to like read and talk about what's actually happening in those stories.
I think that's a great idea.
I am happy to read them and then you get to share your brilliance. So these stories are found in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 8, and it's several verses. So it's chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. And the version or the translation that I am reading from is the New International Version, which is sometimes abbreviated as the NIV. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Just believe and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened.
Thanks be to God. These are some of my favorite healing stories in all of Scripture. I love the image of a woman who has given everything she has to doctors and to other healers of that day, knowing that Jesus will heal her with just a touch of his cloak. What I don't think the woman realized was that not only would she receive physical healing, but she would receive salvation and restoration to community because of her healing, because women who were bleeding were untouchable. And we're told that she bled for more than 12 years. I can't imagine not being touched for 12 years and then having the courage to reach out and touch someone else. Interestingly enough, Jairus' daughter is also about 12, and she too receives not just physical healing, she's not simply just raised from the dead, but she is also given salvation and is restored to community. And we know this because of the type of word in the Greek that's used. It's not the word for physical healing, it's the word for salvation, which is sozo, Sozo. And for the woman, that translation has a implication that it's not just happening now, but that all of her salvation and restoration is still coming in the future and will continue to come to her throughout the rest of her life. It's similar with the little girl, except it's a one-time healing event and a one-time salvation event that's guaranteed to her because of Jesus' touch. The little girl died even though people were praying for her. It was Jesus who gave her salvation and who restored her to community with her family and those around her simply because Jesus could. It had nothing to do with the faith or the prayers of people close to the little girl. Right? Somebody comes to her dad and says, "Your daughter is dead. Stop bothering a teacher." But Jairus knows that Jesus is more than a teacher, that Jesus is the one who gives life to all people.
That is something that is it's so important because when we read that story in almost every single English translation, we see that the word is translated as healed. And for so many of us, based off of how we understand that word in our language, our brains are wired to think this means a physical healing. Because so often when we use that word in our everyday language, that's usually what we're referring to. When you have a little bit of an understanding about the Greek language and you can know how Greek was constructed and how to look up the Greek words in a Greek to English dictionary that is specific to ancient Greek into current English, you learn that there's a particular reason that the writer of the Gospel according to Luke chose this word that we translate as healed, because it can be translated as healed. But it also has this other connotation of salvation along with it. There are other stories in the Gospels that there's a different Greek word that is chosen to describe healing that is specific to there is a literal physical healing. And when you know that There are two ancient Greek words, or at least two ancient Greek words, that can be translated into present day English as healed or heal or healing. It makes me, at least, want to ask questions about what is actually going on in this story and why did the person writing the story choose this word? What meaning are they trying to convey? Pastor Sarah, I think that gets to your point about there is so much more about how this speaks to a restoration to community, a restoration toward being viewed as being a whole person, rather than this physical thing has stopped. Like for the woman, the physical bleeding stopped. Or for Jairus's daughter, she wasn't dead, she was asleep. But what is that actually telling us about how they are as whole people and how the community was shaped and formed around them in light of this?
I think it helps to tell us that our God is a God who cares about us as whole beings and not just physical beings, right? So God cares that we have a community that we can engage with, that we can learn from, that we can be vulnerable with, that we can share our hopes and dreams and fears and tears with. And knowing that when Jesus, the person, walked this earth 2,000 years ago, that was still Jesus's ultimate goal. And why should that change now? Why would that change for present day? That healing would only come in the form of physical healing. I've experienced this myself in my own life as part of my call story. I mentioned earlier that I went to an event or that I was part of an event known as Dale or The Table, which is a ministry of the ELCA youth gathering. These are pre events that happen before the gathering, and it is an event specific for those with physical or neurodivergent disabilities and allows young people to come together to worship and celebrate and serve and learn about the city that they're going to attend the gathering in. My first time at Dale was in 2000, and I went to this event screaming and punching, and if I had been able to kick, I would have been kicking. I didn't want to be at an event for young people with disabilities. I wanted to be with my youth group going to Six Flags and making all those inside jokes that happen on car rides. But my parents had signed me up for this event, and I was put on the train with a youth director to get from Detroit to St. Louis. And so I had a plan. And my plan was that I was just going to hate the event for 3 days. You can get through anything for 3 days if you put your mind to it. So I told the youth director that I was with, whom I trusted very much, that I wasn't going to talk at mealtime, that I wasn't interested in going to any of the workshops or the large group activities, that I didn't want to make friends. I wanted to hang out in our room and play cards, and that I just didn't want to be there. And she would look at me and smirk every once in a while whenever I brought this up to her on the train ride there. Beloved, let me tell you, it took until dinner the first night for me to stop hating it. And that was because a woman at my dinner table asked me if I preferred Backstreet Boys or NSYNC. And all of a sudden, I realized that she was seeing me as a person and not as a girl in a wheelchair. So maybe I could open up to her and share the fact that I was an old school New Kids on the Block fan. But then I leaned towards Backstreet Boys. That evening, we attended worship, and it was a little strange. There were people who voiced prayers in ways that I was not used to hearing prayers voiced, but I knew that they were valid. By the time I got up the next morning, I was so excited to hang out with my new friends and to find joy in the day. 2 days later, and the event was coming to a close, we had elections for the planning committee of the next cycle of events, which was a 3-year cycle. And the position of secretary came and went to a very solid boy named Michael, who did a great job as our secretary for 3 years. And then the position of vice chair came along, and my friend Joanna was elected. And I was jealous because I knew that Joanna was going to get to do some really cool things, and she was going to get to see the church in a way that I was just beginning to comprehend it existed. And then all of a sudden, the name for chair of this committee was read, and it was my name that was spoken. Me, who had wanted nothing to do with this event, came away as the chairperson for the planning committee for the next event. If that's not Jesus working to heal my own insecurities and inabilities to see the gifts of others, I don't know what is. It's been such a clear part of my call story. Ever since then, I knew that I belonged in ministry. I just didn't know what that was going to look like all of the time. And while I started off with a relatively traditional pastor congregation relationships, have learned through my own discernment and prayer that I am also called to share these stories of Jesus and healing with others, specifically because I am a person with a disability. So I no longer have to pity myself for this or to wish myself well, because I know that I've been made whole. And I know that I've received salvation and restoration. And healing for me means that I catch the common cold and it goes away. And I can break a bone and have surgery and recovery. But healing for me does not mean that I will walk again. And that's okay because God has given me skills and opportunities to use those skills in ways that have gone far beyond my wildest dreams and in ways that I'm still exploring and discerning and expect to continue to do for quite a while.
Pastor Sarah, thank you for sharing one of my most favorite stories about like a Sarah I will never know because we weren't friends when we were 14. Um, but and sharing that story in a way that lets us know even more about you and how God has been at work through you and the communities that have surrounded you so that you know and learn that even through like things like New Kids on the Block and Backstreet Boys, you are seen as a whole person. As I've been listening to you share about your story and about how to interpret Bible stories, all of these things I think fall under the umbrella is the current term disability theology and disability advocacy.
Yeah, those are current terms, as is disability ministry.
Through things like your involvement with the table and what that event used to be known as Dale, and through your work as a storyteller and just like living life as someone who happens to have disabilities and is a full-time wheelchair user, my hunch is you are probably more well versed than most of us in this particular area of theology. So I was curious, especially for those who are learning about this way of interpreting, especially Bible stories, if this is new, if you have different resources that you could point folks to to where if they wanted to learn more, they could, and it would be an appropriate way to do that.
The ability to reach out to the table planning team is always an option and one that I encourage. If you or a young person you know is interested in attending the event or learning more and considering attending the event, that can be found on the ELCA's webpage. My writing can currently be found at semisynod.com/publications. I don't specifically write all the time about disability, but there are some writings up there for that. I also really love reading and doing book studies on a couple of books. The first is by Amy Kenny, and her book is called My Body is Not a Prayer Request. And it has 10 chapters that beautifully work its way through scripture and through current events, and the lens of disability and the conversation around healing. I'm currently reading Disability and the Way of Jesus, Holistic Healing in the Gospels and the Church by Bethany McKinney Fox. And this one I'm going to give a recommendation for as well, even though I haven't quite finished the book. I trust that it will end as strongly as it's begun. Those are just a couple of places to get started. I am always available to be found and reached out to for more specific questions or more generalized questions. My Facebook profile is public, so Sarah Mayer-Flatt, and you'll be able to ask questions if you think I'll be helpful in answering them.
Yeah, and those of you who are listening, we have either transcripts or show notes for each episode on the Momentous website, and I will make sure to link how to contact the planning team for the table and ELCA Disability Ministries, as well as 2 books that Pastor Sarah mentioned, and a link to her Facebook page if you would like to get connected, because sometimes when we search for things on our own, it doesn't necessarily pop up easier. So I'll make that a little easier on everyone by making sure those links are included on our website. So thank you, Pastor Sarah, for joining us today and being vulnerable and sharing some of your story with strangers on the internet that are part of the Momentous community. And thank you for giving us quite a bit to think upon the next time we read or we hear read to us a story about healing in the Bible. I think most of us now will ask a question: what kind of healing is it talking about? Which word is it? And I know my heart will be strangely warmed if I hear that anyone is now asking those questions, because I think the more often we ask critical questions, the better we are able to grow in our faith together. So thank you for being with us for this podcast episode.
Absolutely. It's been a great honor and pleasure of mine.
I invite you to take a few deep breaths in to help center yourself for prayer. A prayer for whole healing. Jesus, our embodied God. You love creation so much that you chose to become a part of it. As a baby born in a manger who loved and taught and healed and created community through your ministry. Reveal to us how the way we have co-created the world continues to exclude those with disabilities, whether the disability is visible or invisible. Give us the courage to set aside our dis-ease to accompany them as whole people, wholly loved by you. Send us opportunities to learn more about how to create spaces for relationship and community that are accessible. Help us remove barriers so that our communities are made whole because all are present with us. Amen. Thank you for joining us for our weekly Moment to Us. We are looking forward to growing with each of you and are so grateful that you are a part of the Momentous community. In our next podcast, the burning question we are going to be addressing is God still present with us, or has God just left us to fend for ourselves? So join us for a conversation with Pastor Aaron Lane about where God continues to show up within our communities in so many ways. We are not alone. I want to thank our mission partners, the Southern Ohio Synod and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Their financial contributions and their continued prayers are instrumental in ensuring that the Momentous community continues to grow. However, you are engaging with or discerning partnering with Momentous, we hope that it means you are growing in your faith and noticing God's presence with you. You can always share moments when you noticed God's presence by sending us an email at dailymomentous@gmail.com or sending us a direct message on our social media accounts or by sending us a voicemail. And there are instructions on our website for how to leave a voicemail. If you would like to support the ministry of Momentous, you can attend our in-person gatherings when we have our next ones announced, and you can invite someone else to join you. You can also keep engaging with us online. If you are able to give financially, you can visit our website and find more information about how to donate electronically or by mailing checks to our Synod's secure P.O. box. Each one-time or recurring gift combines together to ensure that the Momentous community continues to grow. Until our next podcast, remember to breathe deeply and that God is present with you every single moment.